There weren't many black people in Denver, but the ones who lived there were angry. There was a protest and a rally. There was a small riot in downtown Denver. Two black ministers gave sermons about injustice that made the local paper. We weren't church-going and we didn't march, but the rage was in the air all around us. And in the center of it all, there was Daddy, the only black cop in his precinct, coming home from work after a day with not a single white cop speaking to him. The white cops who had been our friends became strangers. Me and Cameron walked from the bus stop and no cop car slowed down to ask if we were Green's copper pennies. The white cops made believe they didn't know us. The black ones from other precincts acknowledged my father but stayed clear of him. At night, my father would sit at the dining room table and tell us of the phone calls he'd gotten, anonymous calls from men who identified themselves as cops. "You're doing the right thing, Green," they whisper. "They know what I know," my father said softly, staring down at his plate without touching his food. All my life I've walked into that precinct as a black cop, but I was a cop first. So when the racist jokes were flying, I let them slap me on the back and sometimes laugh right along with them. Even had my own to tell about white folks. It was like that. Black, white, we were all cops. That's all. Cops first. He balled his hand into a fist and stared at it, then stared at me, his eyes starting to water. I swallowed, hating Randall and Dennis and every cop that had brought us to this moment. Cops first. That's always been the rule, no matter what. When I saw that boy falling, I wasn't a cop anymore. 7 days after the shooting, the mayor called for a full investigation. A few days after that, Daddy met with the district attorney. "We can protect you," the DA said, "but it might mean having to leave here. Ask yourself if it's worth it." That night at dinner, Daddy said, "I'm a man. I can testify." He walked slowly through every room of the house, touching the walls, picking up pictures and putting them down again, fluffing pillows and pressing them to his face. When he got back to the kitchen, he sat down at the table and said, "We can leave here." Then he leaned into his fist and cried. 2 days after my father met with the district attorney, he sat me and Cameron down at the kitchen table to tell us we'd be leaving. By then, I had known this was coming. I had been listening to him and Mama go back and forth about the consequences. The night before, I had walked in on Mama sitting at the kitchen table, marking spelling exams and crying. But Cameron had gone on like nothing was happening, even though every radio station in Colorado was telling the story. "I can't believe you're going to screw up our lives like this," Cameron yelled. "I'd want someone to do this if it was one of you," my father said. "They didn't kill us," Cameron said. "Don't do this to us, Daddy." At dusk, someone fired 3 shots through our kitchen window. I was upstairs in my room, spying on my father. I could see him from my window, standing on the back deck, staring out at the trees, every now and then his shoulders rising and falling. Cameron was in the basement. Mama had just walked out of the kitchen to set the table for dinner. Outside, a few birds were making noise. When I ran downstairs, Mama was slumped against the dining room wall, her head in her hands. Daddy was beside her, his arms around her shoulders. Cameron stood in the corner of the dining room, hugging herself hard. Glass covered the kitchen table and floor. The bullet holes were like small black caves against the white kitchen wall. I stared at them without blinking. I was not afraid. Some part of us that had been the same way was forever gone. The holes in the walls proved it. The dead boy, his mother in his room at night calling his name. I thought of dead people in the movies, how their eyes flutter open like magazines. I thought, this part of my life is over now.